Back in 1906, over in Oklahoma, this guy Brannigan was having the worst day ever. He tried running from three fellas claiming to be sheriffs, Dugan, Stillwell, and their boss, Ketchum. But luck wasn't on his side, and they managed to shoot him down and catch him. Ketchum, the charming fellow he is, decided to show his frustration by kicking Brannigan like he was practicing for a soccer match. He kept yelling, demanding to know where some other guy had gone. But Brannigan wasn't a snitch, so he stayed quiet. That only made Ketchum angrier. He tied Brannigan to a horse and dragged him around like some Wild West lawnmower until Brannigan finally gave in and said the guy they were after went east. Did Ketchum let him go after that? Nope. He killed him anyway. Talk about a sore winner. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Henry McCarty and his teenage son Wyatt were busy living the farm life. Henry, originally a city boy from New York, had been around the block and probably across a few states before settling down in Oklahoma. His wife had passed away from tuberculosis, which was the old-timey equivalent of today's everything's fine until it's not. Her brother Al would pop by occasionally to lend a hand and play the cool uncle to Wyatt. Life was simple, peaceful, and full of the usual father-son drama. Wyatt had big dreams of traveling and learning to shoot, but Henry was having none of it. Guns and wanderlust weren't on his parenting checklist. One morning, things got weird. A horse without a rider trotted by, its saddle stained with blood. Wyatt, being the curious kid he was, brought the horse back to their farm while Henry decided to investigate. What he found wasn't pretty. A guy named Curry lying unconscious with a bullet in his shoulder. Henry, not one to leave a man to die, even though he probably wanted to, patched him up with some mud and a handkerchief. Oh, and there was also a gun and a bag full of cash next to Curry. Henry took one look at the money and thought, nope, not getting involved in whatever mess this is, but he couldn't just leave Curry there either. So he cleaned up the scene, grabbed the guy and his stuff, and hauled him back to the farm. Wyatt helped his dad get Curry settled in bed, and they started tending to his wound. Later that night, while everyone was supposedly sleeping, Henry took Curry's gun and the money bag and hid them in a secret spot in his closet. Classic dad move, right? But Wyatt, being the sneaky teenager he was, spied on him through a crack in the door. The next morning, Henry realized the bullet needed to come out if Curry was going to survive. Since he didn't have the tools or the expertise for DIY surgery, he decided to head to town for a doctor. Before leaving, he tied Curry to the bed, just in case the guy woke up and decided to throw a party or something. Wyatt, left alone with a tied-up stranger and a whole lot of curiosity, decided to check out the hidden stash in the closet. He found the bag of money and the gun, and instead of thinking, maybe I shouldn't touch this, he took the gun outside to practice shooting. Let's just say it didn't go well. He missed the bottle a bunch of times before finally hitting it. Meanwhile, inside the house, Curry was having some sort of nightmare about the night his family was killed. It sounded like the kind of backstory that would get him his own spin-off series. Back to Wyatt. After his little shooting adventure, he put the gun back and decided to rummage through another box in the closet. This one had a second gun and a bunch of old newspaper clippings about crimes. Wyatt was probably thinking, wow, Dad's been holding out on me? At the same time, Henry was on his way to town when he noticed Ketchum and his gang hot on Curry's trail. Stillwell, the tracker of the group, figured out someone had tried to cover up Curry's tracks. They even fired their guns into the grass when they heard noises, but luckily, Henry had already skedaddled. Back at the farm, Wyatt noticed that one of Curry's ropes was looking a little loose. When he checked under the blanket covering Curry's other hand, the rope was completely gone. Surprise! Curry was wide awake and ready to make his move. He grabbed a knife from the bedside table and lunged at Wyatt. But instead of hurting him, Curry just wanted his satchel back. Before things could escalate, Henry returned, pulled Curry off his son, and knocked him out cold with a punch. Classic dad save. Henry and Wyatt tied Curry to a chair and woke him up for some good old-fashioned questioning. Since going into town for a doctor was no longer an option, Henry decided to channel his inner DIY surgeon and use a heated knife to dig out the bullet. Curry, naturally, screamed like he was auditioning for a horror movie. In between the yelling, he claimed he was a lawman and warned Henry to pack up and leave before things got worse. But before Henry could press him for details, guess who showed up? Yep, Ketchum and his merry band of not-so-nice men. Ketchum introduced himself as a sheriff and his goons as deputies, spinning a tale about how Curry was a dangerous criminal posing as a lawman. Henry played it cool, saying he hadn't seen anyone matching Curry's description. But Ketchum wasn't buying it. He got especially interested when he learned Henry's last name was McCarty, the same as a notorious criminal from way back. Henry shrugged it off, saying there was no connection, and eventually Ketchum and his crew left, but not before dropping a creepy warning about locking the doors that night. Back inside, Henry was not thrilled to find out Wyatt had been messing around with the gun. He gave his son a couple of slaps for good measure. Wyatt, feeling rebellious, shot back with some hurtful words about leaving the farm and letting Henry die alone. Ouch! Hurt and frustrated, Henry returned to Curry for more answers. Curry finally spilled the beans. He claimed he was the real sheriff and that Ketchum and his gang were the actual criminals. Apparently, they'd killed his deputies, stolen their badges, and even made off with some bank money. Curry had managed to grab the cash back, but got shot in the process. He also pointed out that it was weird Ketchum hadn't shot Henry when he had the chance, which meant the bad guys were probably planning something. Meanwhile, Ketchum and his crew were scheming their next move. They didn't buy Henry's story and were convinced he was helping Curry for a cut of the money. Dugan asked why they didn't just shoot Henry earlier, but Ketchum had other ideas. He noticed Henry didn't handle the gun like your average farmer and figured there was more to him than met the eye. They decided to keep a closer watch on the farm. Dugan stayed behind to spy, while Ketchum and Stillwell went to recruit more muscle and pay a visit to Uncle Al. As the sun went down, Henry told Wyatt to wrap up his chores and come inside. Things were about to get a whole lot messier, and staying out late wasn't an option anymore. Later on, Henry ends up spoon-feeding Curry some soup, which, naturally, Curry isn't thrilled about since he's still tied up like a package. While sipping reluctantly, Curry starts spilling bits about his life after Henry grills him with questions. Turns out Curry's been around and knows folks Henry's familiar with. Curry even apologizes for pouncing on Wyatt earlier, blaming it on waking up disoriented in a strange place. Curry also mentions Henry's face seems oddly familiar, but Henry brushes it off, denying they've crossed paths before. Still, Henry decides to cut Curry a bit of slack and unties one of his hands. To see if Curry's trustworthy, Henry leaves his gun on the table and casually steps away to refill his glass, all while keeping an eye out for any funny business. Curry, surprisingly, doesn't even glance at the weapon. Instead, he starts chatting about his wild past, including the time he saw Billy the Kid bite the dust, the same memory that had popped up in his earlier dream. Henry, impressed by Curry's restraint and storytelling, decides to take a leap of faith. He unties Curry's other hand, hands him back his gun, and advises him to skedaddle before trouble shows up again. Their little heart-to-heart is interrupted by gunshots as Dugan starts blasting through the window. Curry fires back while Wyatt rushes in, only to get grazed by a stray bullet. Curry, still weak from his injury, keels over. Meanwhile, Dugan crawls under the house and starts shooting up through the floor, making every step Henry takes risky. Henry, thinking on his feet, hands Curry's gun to Wyatt and gives him a crash course in shooting. Henry then distracts Dugan by tossing a book on the floor, causing Dugan to waste bullets on a red herring. With Dugan's focus elsewhere, Henry grabs his rifle, heads outside, and shoots under the house until Dugan is forced to come out. Henry promptly shoots Dugan in the leg and tries to squeeze some info out of him. When Dugan keeps his lips sealed, Henry feeds him to the pigs. Yup, you read that right, pig food. Later, Henry patches up Wyatt's bullet graze while dodging Wyatt's questions about his mysterious past. Wyatt feels like his dad doesn't respect him, and he's pretty vocal about wanting mutual respect. Henry then checks on Curry, who's out cold and dreaming about that awful night when his home was torched and his family slaughtered. Henry, rifle in hand, keeps watch outside, knowing more trouble's brewing. Sure enough, the next morning, Ketchum and Stillwell track down Al, who's off bird hunting. They rough him up and drag him back to the farm. Meanwhile, Henry and Wyatt help Curry get dressed so he can leave, but Curry's in no shape to ride. Curry insists they should escape while he stays behind to deal with the bad guys. Wyatt wants to stick around and fight, but Henry sides with Curry, prepping his son for a quick getaway. Their plans go out the window when Ketchum and Stillwell show up with a posse of hired guns. Caught off guard, Henry and Wyatt retreat into the house as Ketchum offers them a deal. Hand over Curry, and they'll walk away unharmed. Henry refuses, and things escalate when Ketchum reveals they've got Al, who's been beaten up badly. Fuming, Henry grabs his rifle and gives Wyatt a gun, warning him to stay low and only shoot if there's no other choice. Curry begs Henry to hand him over, but Henry's not having it. He steps out to face Ketchum, who finally admits he's no lawman and is just dying to figure out who Henry really is. When Henry refuses to trade Curry for Al, Ketchum shoots Al dead on the spot. Wyatt, seeing red, runs out guns blazing, but Henry pulls him back inside before he gets himself killed. Curry gets shot in the leg during the chaos, and Henry scolds Wyatt for acting recklessly. That's when Curry connects the dots. The way Henry talks and handles himself, it all clicks. Curry realizes Henry is none other than Billy the Kid, who supposedly died years ago. Henry ignores the revelation, focused instead on grabbing his old gun and holster. With a few words, he steps outside and starts taking down gang members with pinpoint accuracy. After thinning out the gang, Henry climbs back into the house through a window, giving Curry a chance to take a few shots at the attackers himself. As the gang starts closing in, Henry grabs a knife and sneaks out the back. He stealthily takes down a couple of thugs before hiding under the house to pick off another. Eventually, Henry comes face to face with Stillwell and takes him out in a knife fight. Now, it's just Henry and Ketchum. Ketchum, hiding behind the pig pen, manages to wound Henry in the shoulder. Henry retreats into the woods, baiting Ketchum into a chase. They exchange gunfire among the trees, but Henry's superior skills win out. He wounds Ketchum in the leg and shoulder before finishing him off. Despite his injuries, Henry stumbles back to the farm to help Curry. While tending to Curry's wounds, Henry notices a mark on Curry's arm, the same mark Dugan had. Realizing Curry's been keeping secrets, Henry confronts him, only for Curry to shoot him. Curry confesses that while he used to be a sheriff, he'd turned dirty. He and his deputies had teamed up with Ketchum for a heist, but when Curry found out Ketchum planned to double-cross them, he tried to escape. That's how he ended up in this mess. Henry, bleeding and in agony, listens as Curry gloats about getting to kill Billy, the Kid himself. But before Curry can pull the trigger, Wyatt steps in and shoots him dead. Wyatt wants to get a doctor for Henry, but Henry knows it's too late. With his last breaths, Henry gives Wyatt some final advice. He tells him that when he goes out into the world, he'll hear plenty of tales about Billy the Kid, but only half will be true. Henry admits he's done bad things and doesn't believe in redemption, but raising Wyatt has been his one good act. He tells Wyatt he belongs in this new world, even if Henry doesn't. After Henry passes, Wyatt buries him next to his mother. Once he's ready, Wyatt packs up and sets off to chase the adventures he's always dreamed of. And hey, if you like this story, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike button twice for good measure. Thanks for sticking around. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.